Hey everyone, it's Inigo here and welcome to my channel. Today I'm going to make a video about objects in the Finnish language. Objects in the Finnish language are a little bit different, at least to English, and probably some other languages as well. So it's quite important to get your head around the idea of objects in the Finnish language and how they're a little bit different to maybe what you're used to. Also, before I start, I noticed that I have over 500 subscribers now. So thank you so much to everyone who subscribed. I didn't really think I would get more than like 100, so I'm really grateful. Thank you so much. And I hope that's a sign that my videos are kind of useful at least. But okay, so I'll start anyway. I've written down a few examples with objects in them, and I'll try and explain as I go along in English. And translate these examples. I think firstly I'll start off by saying that with objects in the Finnish language, it's useful to consider whether you're talking about like one object, multiple objects, or objects that are kind of hard to count. And then another thing separate to that, so whether it's one, multiple, or like an uncountable object or a substance even, or a food or a drink. Then another thing to consider is like processes. So whether you're doing a process that takes a long time and you're not specifying the completion or exactly like how long that process is going to be, versus maybe especially when you're talking in the past tense, when you're talking about a completed process, that is different. So in Finnish, there's the idea of like partial objects and full objects, and also kind of similar with processes too. So you'll have like a partial process or a full process. So these are things that are useful to consider. But like I said, I'll go through these examples and hopefully those concepts and ideas will get a little bit easier to understand. So I'll start off with the first one. I've got a few different ideas that I'm going to work with, but the first one I've got se on kirja. I'll move a little bit to the side so hopefully I can put some text here so you can follow along. Se on kirja. This is like basic. I'm not adding any verbs. I'm just describing it is a book, and this is one book. It is a book. The next example, I've got ostin kolme kirjaa. So you've gone from kirja with one A to kirjaa with two A's. The reason for this is if you use a number bigger than the number one, you're always going to use partitiivi with the object. And that's always going to be singular partitiivi or yksikko partitiivi, even if you're using multiple objects. And I used ostin. This means like I bought, past tense, ostin kolme kirjaa. And again, the kirja has turned into kirjaa because I've used kolme, which is a number bigger than one. So I've used the Partitiivi Muoto. The next example is ostin yhten kirjaan, which means I bought, past tense. Yhten is one, so I've changed yksi to yhten and kirja to kirjaan. Ostin yhten kirjaan. And when I said in the beginning that in Finnish you have to consider like partial or full objects, this is the example of a full object. If I'm buying a book, I'm buying the full book. So that's represented with what's called genitiivi, which is an N usually. So yksi has changed to yhten and kirja has changed to kirjaan. And that signifies that I bought the whole book, one whole book. Obviously, before I used kolme, which is three, and there's not really a way to use a number, a specific number, with genitiivi. So that can be a bit confusing. Ostin kolme kirjaa, I've bought three, obviously they're whole books, but because I've used three, that changes how kirja is formed, and that can be a bit complicated with these examples, but you only have to really remember that specific example. The next example, like I said, ostin yhteen kirjan, that means I bought, past tense, one whole book, which is signified by genitiivi. The next example is ostin nämä kirjat, which means ostin, again, I bought, past tense. Nämä is these. So it's also important to remember when I'm saying these, I'm specifying the books. So in this example, I've used Monikko T, which is kirjat, which signifies that I'm talking about all of the books. And that means all of the books within a given context. And I use the word nämä, which means these. So let's say, for example, I'm holding 5 books and I said ostin nämä kirjat. I mean that I bought all of these books, and these are whole books, okay? These aren't partial books. I probably should say as well, when I use partitiivi ostin 3 kirjaa, partitiivi usually signifies like a partial object or a partial process as well. So some of a process, an unspecified process or duration of a process, or or like a partial object, not necessarily the full object, some of the object. Partitiivi, it could be useful to think about partitiivi with the word some from the English language. Okay, but the next idea, so we've talked about one book, we've talked about all of the books, and then if I use a number, I've also spoken about multiple books, a specific number of books. The next one is ostin kirjoja. So I've done kirja to kirjoja, and kirjoja is using Monikko I, and Monikko I is used to signify full objects again, so multiple full objects, but some multiple full objects, which makes it different to Monikko T, which was kirjat. Kirjat signifies all of the books. Kirjoja is some books, full books, whole books, but we don't really know how many. We don't really know how many, and it's not all of them. That's the main difference. So Monikko T is all of them in a specific context. Monikko I is multiple full books, but not a specific number, just some. So the idea of some, this is partitiivi Monikko I, which is like a plural partitiivi. And yeah, like I said, partitiivi, usually it's good to think about the word some. So ostin kirjoja, I bought, past tense, ostin kirjoja, some full whole books, multiple whole books, not just one, more than one. Another example I've got is luen kirjaa, so which means I'm reading a book. Kirja is in partitiivi, which means I'm reading some of the book, not the whole book necessarily. Luen kirjaa means I'm reading some of the book, and lukea is to read. That would be a partitiivi. It would be a partitiivi verbi, and that will always put it into partitiivi in a basic form. Then the next example I've got is luin. So instead of luen, I've got luin, which means I read, past tense. Luin kirjan. So instead of kirja or kirja as a basic word, I've got luin kirjan. And as I said before, the n with the object signifies a whole object. So luin kirjan means I read, luin, past tense, kirjan. The whole book. I read the whole book. Luin kirjan. The next example is luin. I should probably say I could use the word mina, but though mina's not necessary because I'm using luin, which shows that I'm the one that did it. But if I wanted to be like perfect with kirja kieli, I should probably be using mina. But okay, the next example is luin nämä kirjat. So again, I'm specifying which book. So let's say again, I've got these 5 books. Luin nämä kirjat means I read all of these, nämä, these, kirjat. And I'm using Monikko T with kirjat, which means all of the books. And nama specifies exactly the context. So if I'm holding 5 books and I say luin nama kirjat, that means I read all of these whole books, not some of the books, all of the books. All of the books. Okay. Then the next one I've got is luin kirjoja. So again, past tense, luin. Kirjoja signifies some, again, some, but whole books. So some whole books. It could be that I've read all of them, or it could be that I've read some from multiple of the books. It's not too specific, but kirjoja means I've read some multiple whole books. So that's all of the examples I've got with kirja as an example. The next one I've got I'm using is omena. Omena is a food or an ainesana, which means that typically foods will use the Partitiivi Muoto. That's the same with like substances, foods and drinks. However, not always. Most of the time, but not always. So I could say se on omena, which is basic. It is an apple. Se on omena. Omena is the basic form of apple. The next one is suon omena. Again, it's a process. And with omena, I'm eating some apple. It could be like from multiple different apples, and I'm not specifying exactly. But suon omena means I'm eating some apple. Omena is in Partitiivi, and as I said before, Partitiivi, it's good to think about Partitiivi with the English word some. So suon omena, I'm eating some apple. The next one is suon omenan, or even soin omenan could work better. That example means that I'm eating, or I've eaten, a whole apple. So as I said before, I'm using genitiivi with the n at the end of the object, and that signifies that I'm talking about eating the whole apple, omenan. The next one is soin omenoita. Omenoita is Partitiivi Monikko I Partitiivi Monikko I, which signifies full, multiple objects. Soin omenoita, I ate multiple full apples. I'm not specifying exactly how many. If I used the example with my book, the kirja, before, I could say soin kolme omena. Soin kolme omena, which means that I ate 3 apples. I guess I'm not specifying whether I eat like the whole amount of apple, but soin kolme omena, that's in Partitiivi. And then the last example with omena is soin nama omenat. So again, if I'm holding some apples, actually I said soin, so I probably wouldn't be holding them. So suon nama omenat would mean suon is like I'm gonna eat, nama these, I'm holding some apples, 3, 4, 5 apples. Omenat, Monikko T signifies all of the objects within a given context. So suon nama omenat means I'm gonna eat all of these apples. That's another example. And then I've got one which we're talking about like processes. So I spoke about partitiivi. Partitiivi being, I would say, probably close to using the word some in the English language. We're not necessarily specifying like the full process. So in Finnish, it's really important to just think about like some of, or like the full, whether it's a process or an object. So with objects, with processes, if you're going to do a process that's sort of vague, somewhat vague, and it's not the full process, and also if the process takes a long time, it's also really important to think about whether the process takes a long time. In that case, it's probably going to be partitiivi. So with the example that I've got is rakennan taloa. which means I am building a house. Because it's a process and it's a really long process, that goes into a Partitiivi Muoto. Rakennan taloa. Another example would be rakensin, I built, rakensin talon. So rakensin talon, the difference here is that the process is completed. Rakensin is past tense, I built, and I built the whole house. The whole house exists, the whole house is there, it's a completed process. It's not a partial process, it's a completed process that is over. So rakensin talon. Rakennan taloa, on the other hand, it's a very long process, and that's basically why it's not talon. Even though you might intend to build the whole house, because it's a process that takes a long time, it goes into a Partitiivi Muoto. Okay, so those are 3 different sets of examples. And then I've got some more examples where we're talking about negative. So negative sentences, most of the time, will put objects into Partitiivi Muoto, regardless of whether it's full objects or multiple objects. It will usually go into Partitiivi. There are some exceptions, depending on whether you use some verbs, like bida. If you use the verb bida, which is to like, then you probably won't use Partitiivi. But in most examples, negatiivi lause or negatiivi lauset will be Partitiivi. So here's some examples for you. I've got minulla on kirja, so we're going back to the book. Minulla on kirja, which means I have a book, one whole book. Kirja is in basic form. On the other hand, I could say minulla ei ole kirja. So it's gone from kirja to kirja. The reason for that is it's in a negative. The sentence minulla ei ole kirja means I do not have a book. So even though it's still just one book, and it could be the whole book, just because it's negative, you're going to say minulla ei ole kirja instead of minulla ei ole kirja. Okay. Next example is minä haluan kirjan. So I want the book, the whole book. I want the whole book. Minä haluan kirjan. On the opposite side, you've got minä en halua kirjaa. I do not want the book. So even though it's the full book, even though on the other side it was genitiivi, so to want the whole book is genitiivi. If I don't want the whole book, one book, it's partitiivi purely because it's a negative sentence. Another example is minä haluan kirjoja. So that means I want some books. This is kirjoja is partitiivi Monikko I version for kirja. Minä haluan kirjoja, which means I want some full books. So the books are whole books. I want some. So partitiivi, remember the English word some. Minä haluan kirjoja. Kirjoja, Monikko I is plural, so multiple Monikko. Partitiivi, some, whole, multiple books. On the other side, you could have minä en halua niitä kirjoja, which means I do not want those books. I do not want those books. Minä en halua niitä kirjoja. Even though I'm specifying, so I've got these, niitä. Niitä is in partitiivi as well, because it's a negative sentence. Even though I'm specifying those books, minä en halua niitä kirjoja, even though I'm specifying the books that I don't want, even though I'm specifying it's all of those books, it's still going to be in a Partitiivi Muoto because it's negative. And then on the other side of that, you have minä haluan nuo kirjat. So in this example, it's Monikko T because I have expressed which books they are and that I want all of them. And because it's not negatiivi, it's a Monikko T Muoto. Monikko T Muoto, kirjat. So these are the examples that I've given. Like I said, the main thing to remember is in Finnish with objects, it's really important to consider whether you're talking about one object, multiple objects, or like substances, foods, drinks, for example, because those things will change the conjugations of your objects. And then another thing is like, is it partial or full objects, or partial processes or full processes? So partial will typically be represented by Partitiivi, and full will usually be represented by Genitiivi with the N on the end of your object. That's kind of like the key thing to think about. Like in English, you would probably say, like you would use the word some a lot. You would use the word some. I want to eat some apple. I'm going to read some of the book, for example. In Finnish, you don't really need to use the word some because it's kind of shown when you use the Partitiivi Muoto, and Genitiivi also signifies like the whole book. So in English, you might say, I read this book, and you mean that you read the whole book. In fact, Finnish kind of is better because in this example, it's more specific. If I say I read this book, I could mean I read half of it. I could mean I read all of it. I could mean I read 10 pages of it. But in Finnish, if you say minä luin kirjan, it means I read the whole book. Kirjan signifies 100%. Okay, so these are some like simple things to think about. I haven't gone over like everything because, as with Finnish, there's so many different rules that all kind of conflict with each other. But hopefully this gives people like a basic understanding, especially for me, like at the start when I first started learning Finnish, I used to do a lot on Duolingo, and Duolingo pretty much just uses Partitiivi and Perus Muoto, which is like basic and partitive. But once you go beyond that, then you're going to start having to think about like partial versus full, like multiple. Oh, they also use Monikko T in Duolingo. So in Duolingo, you understand the idea of like multiple objects, all of them, but it doesn't teach you about multiple objects, multiple full objects, but just some multiple full objects, which is Monikko I. Monikko I Partitiivi would be some full multiple objects. It is a little bit complicated, and I'm probably not perfect at it, but hopefully this video helps. But yeah, I hope it helps. Someone did ask me for this video, so if you're watching this and you asked for it, then I hope it helped. But if there's anything that still isn't clear, do leave a comment. And if there's anything else that someone's trying to understand, do leave a comment. And if I know something about it, I will try and make a video. Or if people have like any other suggestions, if people want to know something about living in Finland or anything about Finland, also leave a comment. Also, if I left anything out that anyone thinks is important, then please do leave a comment as well. I'm not perfect, but I'm trying my best to provide some useful information, especially because I don't think there's a lot on YouTube with English speakers. Usually it's like Finnish speaking, which is good, obviously, but if your Finnish isn't at a high enough level, it can be hard to really like understand what people are saying. And maybe from my perspective as an English speaker, I'm kind of giving my own perspective, which might again be helpful if you understand English or you are an English speaker. But yeah, if I've left anything out, then please do leave a comment, because I know my Finnish isn't perfect. Anyway, I know this is a long video now, so thank you so much for watching. Thank you again to everyone who's subscribed. I really, really appreciate it. And I hope to see you all again soon.